Hey guys, thank you so much for joining us for another edition of Inside the Music Industry. And I am Dr. Jennifer Otter Bickerdike. Today's episode is via Skype. We're trying another Skype one. And I have none other than Nick Ruffini, as you guys requested. And he is from the Drummers Resource. Am I saying your last name correct, Nick?
You are. Yeah, actually, I was impressed how you said it. Most people say Ruffini.
Do they?
Yeah.
No, it's the Italian connection. So Nick, can you tell us a little bit about the Drummers Resource, what it is, and how you started it?
Sure. Just I guess a little bit of backstory. I was a pro touring drummer. I guess technically I'm still a drummer. Uh, and after a while, I was on the road a lot and decided that I wanted to try to keep my foot in the music business, but not necessarily have to be on the road because I was in a band for a while it was my band. I was sort of the quote unquote owner of the band. And there's a distinction if you're the owner of the band or you're a sideman. And when you're the owner of the band, you share in all the profits, the proceeds, the touring, the merchandise, the royalties, all of that kind of stuff. But when you're a sideman, you're just an employee at will. So you go on tour, they pay you X amount of dollars a week. When you come home from touring, you get no more money. And so the band that I was in, that was mine, after 12 years or so, that band ended. So then I started doing some sideman work, which was great, but I like having control of sort of my own destiny. So I didn't want to be in a position where I had to just take a gig because I needed the money and, play gigs that I didn't want to do or whatever the case may be. So I was learning about online sort of passive income kind of things, which this is not a passive income way of making money, but I learned about podcasting, and I always found myself sitting down with drummers or taking lessons with drummers. And I didn't want to talk about how to play specific things. I just wanted to soak up knowledge about just life and approaches to playing and concepts and hear stories and things like that. So I started asking people if I could just talk to them, and I would pay them like I was taking a drum lesson, but I would just sit down and have coffee with them. And I thought, I bet other people would want to hear these conversations as well. And if I can get enough people to listen to these conversations, then I can charge advertisers for access to my audience. So I started it in 2013, in November of 2013, and since have done almost 500 interviews with literally the greatest drummers in the world. So that's how it started, and that's sort of where we are now.
Oh my good Lord. I have so many things to can I rewind on like 20 different
Yeah,
points that
let's
you
go.
had there. So the first thing is, how did you go from when did you start playing the drums? Let's start there. Did you start at quite a young age?
I started when I was 15. I started playing piano when I was 9, and then I played guitar for like a week and a half, and then I started playing drums when I was 15.
How did you go from that to being in a band that was a monetized band? Was your band signed to a label or anything like that?
No, we were independent, and it was a total grassroots operation that we built from nothing to a full touring band. It started with so I went to high school with a guy named James McLaughlin. He's a guitar player, and at the time he'd always been a piano player, but he was a guitar player. And I heard about him, through the grapevine, that he was a musician and all that. So we auditioned him, and he played guitar, and I was like, he's okay. I mean, he's a decent comparable guitar player, but I was kind of looking for something different. And he said, well, I play piano too. And then he came over the next time and played piano, and I was like, don't you ever bring your guitar ever again. He was phenomenal at piano. So ever since he's played piano ever since, and that was 20 years ago. And now he's a professional touring organ player and has 4 different bands that he's playing organ in and all that stuff. So he and I started this band with another guy that I grew up in the restaurant business, and there was a girl who worked for us, and we had a Christmas party, and her boyfriend came, and we were talking, and he was like, yeah, I play guitar and I write songs. And we got together, and he's a great songwriter, probably one of the best lyricists I've ever met. And so we started putting this band together. I found a bass player that I went to college with, and we just started touring, like literally just grassroots. I think the first gig that we ever played was like a friend of a friend who worked at a bar or something like that, and they gave us a gig, and from there we got another gig, and we hustled. We worked hard and wrote a lot of songs and toured, and sometimes we played to two people, and sometimes we played to 20,000. So.
And for those that are not familiar with Drummer's Resource, what is this band called so they can look it up and check it out?
The band is called Monacy, Monacy.
And were you doing other things still on the side while you were in the band?
The only thing that I was doing was working. I always worked at my parents' restaurant up until I was 33 years old. Like, it's this weird thing that it's always just been a part of my life, and it's never really felt like work to me. It's just what we did in our family. So, some people like go to church and go to church retreats with their family. I worked in the restaurant business.
With great meatballs, real Italian meatballs.
With very good meatballs.
Okay, so
real Italian New York meatballs.
Real Italian New York meatballs. What was the thing that made you decide? Okay, and one last thing about this. So you were talking about the difference between you're the owner. Is that what you said? The owner of the band? What was the word that you used?
Yeah, I mean, I guess you can call. I mean, if you boil it down, a band is a business, and it's no different than any other business. So you have the owner, and then you have employees. Like Justin Timberlake is the owner. The guy who plays piano for him is the employee. So
if you're in a band, though, a band of multiple people. I mean, when you first said that, I'm like, okay, so you were like a Phil Collins kind of figure, like the wild mastermind behind it all as the drummer. But yeah. I love.
But I wasn't singing. But I wasn't singing.
Okay, I love me some Phil.
No singing.
There's nothing wrong with that, by the way. I love me some Phil.
I love Phil Collins.
I love Phil Collins. But how? Because you assembled the band, and from the very beginning, I'm just thinking of this. Other people are listening to this, and they're like, "Well, isn't a band usually a band like a democracy? Like, how did you get to be this kind of the sole main point person for it?"
Well, I always try to demystify this kind of stuff. So think about it like if you were building a business and you had 5 people who were partners, then there's 5 partners in the band. There's 5 partners in the business. There's 5 partners in the band. Sure, on multiple levels, it's a democracy, but at the end of the day, someone needs to steer the ship. I've always assumed that role, and I always wondered why, and I thought everyone understood business and understood, entrepreneurship and all of that sort of stuff. And then I realized that I've been in business since I literally started working at my parents' restaurant when I was 7.
I like that your parents are getting you working as soon as possible.
Oh yeah, I used to leave Little League practice to go to work. I had to leave Little League practice early. I always thought that everyone understood business. I was like, yeah, it's like, why doesn't everyone understand this? But then as I got older, I realized, okay, well, I had 15 years of training before anyone else did. So I naturally assumed that role. But on the flip side of it, I did not assume the role of songwriter and all of that. So I wasn't writing the lyrics. I wasn't writing the tunes. I mean, we were co-writing the tunes. I shouldn't say that, but the bulk of the ideas and 99.9% of the lyrics were coming from James, the piano player, Brian, the guitar player, the other Brian, who we called his name's Nash, but he was the other guitar player. So they were writing the tunes, and we were getting together. We were working out sort of the melodies and co-writing the songs. And then, so they were sort of handling the music side, and I was handling the business side. So everyone had their roles. The bass player didn't do shit, but that's normal. But sorry, bass players. So that's how it went. I just naturally assumed that role. I was good at it. Everyone trusted me to do it. They didn't want to be a part of it. As a matter of fact, I remember the piano player was in school for business, and he came to rehearsal one day and he was like, dude, I'm not doing that anymore. I switched my major to music. He was like, I don't know how the fuck you could sit and talk about business all day long. He was like, it would drive me nuts. And for me, I'm like, I could do that, all day, every day. I love it. So I think we gravitate towards the things that we're good at.
No, that's true. I mean, one other thing is I still am surprised when, especially starting out, it seems like some artists don't like to think of it as being a business. And I think you have to be thinking of it as a business from the very, very beginning.
I agree. Well, it depends. If you want to put a band together and just hang out with your friends and just play some music, there's nothing wrong with that. There's absolutely, like, I encourage that. If you want to go be an accountant and play on the weekends, I think that is awesome. And if you make $7 or $700, it doesn't matter. I think that's cool. But if you want to build a band that tours and you can do it professionally, it has to be a business. You would never open a restaurant and be like, I just love cooking. I don't really care if we make any money. You wouldn't do that. So as long as the business side doesn't trump the artistic creativity, and you're just, as soon as you start thinking about the money all the time, then that becomes a problem. But you have to be cognizant of it. And if you don't want to do it, then you got to find someone who does, or at least knows how to do it.
No, I could not agree more with you. And then just one last question before we get into to more back to Drummer's Resource. So
Sure.
how did you translate from that then, and what made you decide to change from being in a band with other people to being in other people's bands as a touring musician?
So the band, I had, you live in a town. We were sort of one of the bigger bands in the town, and you start to get to know people, and through touring and opening for people and people opening for us and being on the same bill and all that sort of stuff, you start to network, start to get to know people, and it's like, oh, I would love to play with you sometime, or whatever. But the biggest thing that I did that I instruct a lot of people to do when I talk about on the podcast is, if you want to start playing with other people, then just start hiring them to play. Like, most musicians are hired guns. So if you want to play with this guitar player and that bass player, go to that guitar player, go to that bass player and say, hey, I'd love to hire you guys for a gig. Put a band together, book a show, and pay them to play. So, and now you are the boss. But what happens there is interesting. Once you start hiring other people for gigs, there's this law of reciprocity where they start hiring you for gigs too. So when I put my record out, I wanted to play with specific people. So I hired specific people to play on my record. And then when we started touring to support the record, I hired them to play. And then guess what? When they needed a drummer, they started hiring me. If I'm giving them work, they start giving me work. Next thing you know, I'm getting hired by all of these other people to play as a sideman. They're playing in my band, I'm playing with them. So you start to build this web, and it starts to spread out. So we, as drummers specifically, are naturally sidemen. So we sit and wait for the phone to ring. And if we don't have any gigs, we say, oh no, woe is me, I don't have any gigs. But there's an easy way around that. Just go out and hire people to play. And it may cost you some money. I remember there was like an organ player that I wanted to play with. I had to put him up in a hotel. I had to pay him to play and all that kind of stuff. And I didn't look at it as losing money. I just looked at it as an investment. I was investing in my career and my future. And after the second time, I didn't have to pay him as much, because in the beginning, he's like, I don't really know who you are. So if I'm going to play with you, it's got to be worth my while. But then I started paying him. I didn't have to pay him as much. Like, I didn't have to pay the premium. And then he started hiring me for gigs. That got me other gigs. So then that's how it works. And then next thing you know, there was 5, 6, 7 people who were constantly calling you to play for them. So that's how I did it.
That's really interesting. I've not heard that theory before, but it does make sense. Like, you're basically just making your own destiny, as cheesy and California as that sounds, but it is like you're steering the ship of your own career in that instance.
Yeah, I mean, I wasn't about to go out and go to open mic night. I mean, I was like, when I started doing it, I was 30. So, like, when I started to branch out and like get more sidemen work, I was doing like a little here and there, but not a lot. And, but I wasn't about to like go to the open mic night on Tuesday night and be like, hey man, I'd really love to play with you sometime. Or, I was already experienced. I'd already been touring. I'd already had connections. I owned a booking agency. I was a talent buyer. Like, I had a lot of different stuff going on. Like, I was seasoned at that point. And not that I'm saying that the open mic nights are beneath me or beneath anyone. I'm not saying it like that. I just think a lot of times they're a big waste of time. So I would rather do something that's more effective. And at the end of the day, if I call 3 people and I hire them, I know that I have a gig Friday night because I booked it. I got the band, put the band together. And I don't know. I think a lot of times people are either scared to put the band together, or, that fear of failure thing where they think it's not going to work, or the people are going to say no, or whatever the case. I'm telling you right now, 99% of the people, if you want to play with them and you pay them enough money, they will play. Now, you might not be able to get Sting to play bass in your band, but like, I bet you can get Sting's, guitar player.
Who's been the biggest in that scenario that you're talking about? Who's been the biggest surprise in terms of, oh my gosh, I got this person to come and play with me on something for you?
Uh, Probably Pat Bianchi, who's a organ player, and he's arguably one of the greatest Hammond B3 organ players in the world. Joey DiFrancesco. So I put my record out with a guy named Johnny DiFrancesco. Johnny DiFrancesco comes from a long lineage of very famous organ players. His dad is Papa John DiFrancesco, who is in the Jazz Hall of Fame. His brother is Joey DiFrancesco, who started playing with Miles Davis when he was 16. And Johnny is an extremely accomplished guitar player. Like taught at Berkeley. Like I think he taught like John Mayer and Joe Bonamassa and all these serious dude. So playing with him, I grew up watching him play and was always blown away by him. And when I started playing with him, that was definitely a pinch myself moment. And then when we got Pat Bianchi, who is sort of like the protege of Joey DiFrancesco, once we got him, it was like me, Johnny DiFrancesco, and Pat Bianchi on a gig, and I was literally playing, looking at both of those guys like, I can't believe I'm playing with these two guys. So, and I never went the pop route. Like I never tried to get the Justin Timberlake gig or anything like that. That's just not my style, not my speed. Plus Brian Fraser Moore is my buddy and he's a monster drummer. So there's no way I could even get that gig anyway. But so all the people that I wanted to play with were in the jazz, funk, that idiom. So I played with them and, it's amazing. But it wasn't that hard.
I was gonna say, like, once you started doing that, there's like this almost like aha moment of, oh my gosh, I can do this, and then more of that kind of energy starts to happen more and more and more. That's what I found for myself is once you kind of start playing to people that you super admire and look up to, and doing things with them. I don't know, like it isn't that being with them necessarily vaults you into kind of the next level up, but suddenly you realize that you can do it, and it's almost like having that confidence, I think, allows you to be more open to bigger and better things. I know it sounds really cheesy, but for me, it's really true.
I don't think that's cheesy at all. I believe that 1,000%. I think that most of the time, the thing that's standing in our way is our mindset. And we talk ourselves out of it. We don't challenge our comfort zone. We tell ourselves we're not good enough. We can't do it. Everyone else is smarter than me. I don't have the connections, blah, 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 blah. All those bullshit excuses, self-limiting beliefs that we tell ourselves. But the one thing I said earlier, I said that it wasn't hard. Let me rephrase that. It wasn't complicated. It was hard work, but it wasn't a complicated thing. I didn't have to like figure out some algorithm or like figure out some crazy equation. It's just one foot in front of the other and creating momentum. And once you have momentum begets momentum, and it just continues and continues and continues.
Yeah, you said it much more articulately than I did. Do you also think that having a good reputation already at age 30 as a professional helped you? Like you already had a network of people. Was that a crucial part in it as well? So people knew who you were and that whole thing. Like you weren't, like you said, like you were kind of a known entity and you already had a reputation. Was that important, do you think, the networking element of that?
Yes. I don't think that I had like this huge reputation where like I walked in the room and everyone knew who I was. But the one thing that we always did with Monacy, with that band, every single venue that we played, we said hello and introduced ourselves to everyone, every single person. We knew the security guard's name. We knew the loading dock guy's name. We knew the bartender's name. We knew the bouncers' names. We knew the sound guy's name. We knew the lighting director's name. We knew everyone. And we made a point to say hi to everyone. And that reputation spreads quickly. So every single time we would go back, people were like, man, we love when you play here. All of you guys are so awesome. Like we treated everyone very, very well because without them, there is no show. And I think that a lot of people overlook that. So I'm big on reputation. I always quote Warren Buffett, who said, "It takes 20 years to build a reputation and 5 minutes to destroy it." So you can build up all of this good equity and karma, and if you do one thing, you can destroy all of that stuff that you've built. So like I said, I don't know if I necessarily had or have this huge reputation where, you walk in, it's like, oh, that's Nick Ruffini, that's the guy. Not that, but I know that I'll put that reputation up against anyone where, anyone can call anyone and ask about me. And I know that they're going to say something positive about me because I've worked hard to make sure that I always stay in that light, if that makes sense.
No, I mean, that is the most important thing. I mean, in what we do, that's almost as big a calling card as your actual work itself. Are you
100%.
Not cool like I'm cool, but like, are you a cool, pleasant,
Right.
nice, thoughtful person? And that goes a
Right.
long way. And I think a lot of people really, really don't understand that at all.
And this industry is way smaller than everyone thinks it
Oh,
is.
God, it is, isn't
So
it?
everyone knows everyone, and if you're a dick on a gig, everyone will know about it. And guess what? I hate to burst your bubble, but you could be the most amazing drummer in your town. There's 5 other drummers in the next town who are just as good, if not better. So like, talent doesn't afford you to be an asshole, and you will get replaced very quick. And I know guys who were on like super super high level gigs, and in hindsight were said, I was an asshole, and they got fired, and they were killing drummers. So it's not always that. And I hate to say this because I don't want it to sound like talent and skill isn't important, but it almost isn't as important as your attitude.
I'd agree with that because no one's going to want to work with you if you're a cock. Yeah.
And everyone is a good player. Like, that's table stakes. Everyone can play. So like, that is just the barrier to entry is you have to be an amazing musician, right? Okay, everyone has that. So if you're a dick, you're automatically out. It doesn't matter how good you are because there's all these other people who are great and they're cool. And I will say that like I mentioned, I've interviewed almost 500 of the greatest drummers in the world. Guess what? They all have that quality. They're humble, they're nice, they're courteous, they're respectful, they show up on time, they're professionals, like they're easy to get along with, all of that stuff. I don't think that's not a coincidence. They're there because they have that attitude. I believe that 100%.
No, I 100% agree with you as well. Okay, so you decide to do Drummer's Resource. Why, you wanted to do these stories. What stories particularly did you want to cover when you first started?
Meaning what drummers did I want to interview, or what particular things did I want to pull out of each interview?
I would say both those things, actually, yes.
Well, I didn't really have, I mean, I had a hit list, obviously, which I got a lot of them. Like, I wanted John Fishman from Phish. I got him. I wanted James Gadson, who is like one of the most prolific Motown drummers of all time. Played on like Bill Withers' Use Me Up and all that stuff. So I got him. Steve Gadd, who is maybe one of the most recorded drummers of all time. Got him. J.R. Robinson, who played on a ton of like Michael Jackson stuff. I think he played on 5,000 records or something like that. So there was those guys. I mean, there's a long list of other people who I wanted, who I've had on the podcast. But the biggest thing that I wanted, there's 1,000 different places that you can go to figure out how to be a better drummer, like how to play paradiddles better, or how to play this style, or all that sort of stuff. And that's not really my wheelhouse. I'm not like a big gear guy, or like I don't like nerd out on chops and different techniques and all that kind of stuff. But what I do like is I've always been a fan of personal development. I've always been a fan of understanding what makes people successful, what makes people unsuccessful, habit formation, mindset, all of that sort of stuff. So what I wanted to do is talk to the most successful drummers in the world, glean those insights from them, sort of life lessons that they've learned along the way. But if I could do that with just drummers, the audience can hear all of this information that'll help them be more successful in life, career, whatever it is, but they're hearing it and viewing it through the lens of a drummer. So it's someone they can relate to. So it doesn't sound like some guy preaching all of this like rah rah, like you're good enough, you're smart enough, and gosh darn it, people like you kind of thing. It's like this guy does exactly what I want to be doing. So he's speaking the same language that I understand. And I think it's a niche market. So every single person that's listening, the person on the other end, the person who's being interviewed, speaks their language because they know that they're drummers. And so I think that if you can hear great wisdom from someone who you can relate to, I think that it sinks in more, and I think that you actually take it to heart. So that's always been the goal for Drummers Resource, is to be, motivation, education, inspiration for drumming and beyond. Like that's what the tagline is on the intro of the podcast. And that's what it's been. So now there's so many people that are like, I listened to your podcast with so and so, and the story that he talked about with this made me actually like quit my job and go start another career doing this other thing that I wanted to do. And it didn't even it had nothing to do with drumming. Like I've had people be like, your podcast made me quit smoking. Your podcast, inspired me to start losing weight. Your podcast inspired me to get out of a bad relationship that I was in. So like it's working. It's work, and it's not like we're not like super over the top, like it's not some like douchey motivational, speaker kind of thing. It's just like real shit. It's just real stories that people have gone through, how they sort of overcame those things, and the things that they do day in and day out to either gain or maintain, their level of quote unquote success, however you define that, whether it's money, whether it's gigs, whether it's fitness, whether it's, anything. It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter how you define that, but it's all in there. So, and there's 460 episodes for you to dig into.
Someone's listening to this, like, how did he get in contact with these amazing people? What would you say? Like, what's been your tricks to, besides saying, I'll get a coffee for you, I have this great reach of listeners. How have you gotten in touch with some of these legendary people?
In the beginning, I had a couple people who I knew. So uh, I got a couple interviews in the beginning, and then from there you start to use the guests that you have as leverage to get other guests. And I would go to the NAMM conference every year, and I would hustle, and anytime I would see anyone, I would just walk up to them and be like, "Hey man, I got this podcast. I've had this person on and this person on. I would love to hear you tell your story." And from there it starts to get bigger and bigger. And then I was in contact with like the major drum magazines, and then the brands and all that sort of stuff, and they were sharing the information. And then every time an interview would come out, I would give the person who was on the podcast, I'd give them a ton of material to help promote it. And you start to build momentum like anything. And I know that's not like a specific answer, but like specifically, what did I do? I literally sent thousands and thousands of emails, and some people responded, some people didn't. But the thing I think that differs me from a lot of people is that I am fucking relentless. I don't stop. So I had Chris Coleman, who is a drummer, obviously. We were emailing for 3 years before I got him on the podcast, and not like I'm not like emailing him every day, like bugging him, but I'm just consistent. So that's what I did. I send people messages on Facebook. I send people messages on Instagram. I send people messages on Twitter. I send emails. Anytime I'm out somewhere, I network. Every time I have someone on the podcast, I say, if you can think of anyone else who you think would be a good fit. And I have certain criteria for people that I have on the podcast. So it's not just a matter of just like going out and finding any drummer to be on there. But it's repeating the same process over and 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 over again.
I'm glad it's not just me that's a stalker, because I was talking to my boss. I said not even half, I'd say like 90% of what I do is tracking down contact information or networking, and then following up on those until you land someone on the podcast. Like that's basically most of it's the legwork of getting them to actually come on the podcast, isn't it?
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Hugely
Yep. I
important.
mean, and look how long you and I have been emailing back and forth.
Yeah, that is true.
You know?
Celebrity that you are.
Yeah.
What? How long do you think it took for the podcast to be successful, like, and for the monetization to take over?
A year and I think it was 13 months or 14 months.
Of that, like, just hardcore grafting, like you're talking about.
Yeah, I still now I always compare it to a plane. So in the beginning, you have to get down the runway, which is the hardest part, and you have to take off. And then you have to climb. And then once you reach a cruising altitude, then everything is, there's the least amount of stress on the airplane. There's the least resistance, and your in-flight ride is a lot smoother. So obviously I fly a lot. So
I was going to say, you have these really good analogies. It started with the meatballs and it's just gone on from there. So loving it.
So yeah, I think the first 13 months was me going down the runway, taking off and getting to a cruising altitude. Now, I don't want to say we're on autopilot by any means, but it's not as much of a grind as it used to be. Like before it's really hard when you're not making money to keep going, and it was just like a relentless grind. But now, like the flywheel is spinning a little bit, so there's a little less resistance. I can email people and they've heard of the podcast before. I can reach out to people, I can reach out to brands, or I can reach out to other media outlets, and they either know me, they know the podcast, that we have mutual friends, something like that. So I think from the outside, people are like, oh yeah, well, it's easy because, yeah, well, of course it's easy for you to do that. You're Nick and you have Drummer's Resource. But like Nick from Drummer's Resource didn't have shit 5 years ago. So that's the thing that is hard when you don't have anything. It's like you have to build it. And then once you build it, you'll be rewarded for those efforts. So now we're sort of we're in a good spot where, and I mean, it's still hard, like it's still a business and it still requires a lot of attention, and there's still, that grind aspect to it, but not like it was when you're 12 months in and you're not making any money.
What do you think has been the most successful way in the beginning, especially, that you got people to follow and download and listen to the podcast?
I did a lot of Facebook ads, and because Instagram wasn't popping as much as it is now when I started. So I ran a bunch of Facebook ads. So I probably spent, I don't know, maybe $5,000 on Facebook ads, and over the course of a long time, not in one fell swoop, and then and just got involved in the community. So I was in all of the Facebook groups, on Instagram, on Twitter, reaching out to people, commenting, liking, posting, reposting, all of that sort of stuff. Just like getting involved in the community, adding some value, creating conversations, all that sort of stuff. It was never like, hey man, you're a drummer, you should go listen to my podcast. Like someone would play a Steve Gadd lick and I'd comment on it and be like, hey, I actually had Steve on my podcast and we talk about this specific lick. It's at the 24:13 mark if you want to check it out.
So you were just just trying to get the guests on is a massive thing, but it sounds like equally important for you for the success was this just endless going in and really kind of one-on-one talking to people and telling them about it and being evangelical about your own podcast.
Yeah, like literally one by one, like one person at a time. And then, if you get one person every day, at the end of the week, you have 7 people, but those 7 people tell one other person. So now you have 14 people, right? And then you have 28 people. So it spreads that way. But even now, I don't do any mass. I mean, I have my email list, but I don't have any mass communication. I don't have any bots on Instagram that are going around and liking people's posts and all that bullshit. Like every single thing that I do on every platform is me doing it and talking to people and responding and sharing and liking and commenting. That's all me. It's not automated. I don't have a team that does it. Nothing. I mean, I have a team that creates the graphics and all that sort, but the physical posting of everything, I do every single post. Every single post that Drummer's Resource has ever done, I've done. So, and I still do it. to this day.
Are you ever like, oh my God, I'm so over this? Or do you still feel excited about it?
No, I mean, sometimes with anything, it becomes a job. And so, yeah, are there days that I have to do things that I don't want to do? Of course. I think when people think that they're going to do, quote unquote, do what they love for a living, it's all going to be milk and honey, and there's not going to be, there's not going to be days that they don't feel like doing it. That's bullshit. That's 100% bullshit. I do shit every day that I don't want to do. Every day. Like, you think I feel like sitting down and writing, 45 emails? No. I don't feel like making sales calls. I don't, sometimes I don't feel like doing the interviews. Sometimes I'm sick, or sometimes I don't feel like sitting on Instagram for an hour and a half commenting and sharing posts and all of that kind of stuff. But at the end of the day, like, on a macro level, I love what I do. It's amazing. Like, I can't believe that I get to do this for a living. Like, it completely blows my mind. So I'm willing to, do the shit that I don't want to do. But like, even practicing, I know that there's people, I mean, myself, I know everyone, like, a lot of times they go into the practice room, they're like, I don't feel like being here, but I know I should be. So I'm going to tough it out. So like, you're never going to enjoy, even, I don't care who you are, if you're Oprah or Richard Branson or anyone else, like, I guarantee every single day Richard Branson does shit that he doesn't want to do. But it's got to be done, It's like, do you take the trash out in your house? Yeah. Why? Because it's got to be done. I don't want to take the trash out. I don't want to clean the fucking toilet, but I have to. It's got to be done. So there's parts of the job that have to be done, but like 99.9% of the stuff, all right, I'm exaggerating. 75% of the stuff I absolutely love, and I wouldn't want to do anything else, outside of music. Like, I don't know, am I going to be running Drummer's Resource for the next 15 years? I don't know the answer to that, but I definitely want to keep working in the music business,
Well, does Richard Branson take out his own trash? That's really the question we should be asking ourselves right
Definitely not.
now.
Definitely not. I'm trying to get to that level.
Yeah, exactly, exactly. I have 3 more questions for you. Is that okay? How has the role, do you think, of being a musician changed in the last 10 years?
That's a tough question. I don't think the role of being a musician has changed in the sense of being a musician, but I think the career of being a musician has changed because, one, I think that you have to have multiple irons in the fire. So, and you'll see it with everyone. They're writing books, or they're doing clinics, or they have another side job, or they have a production company, or they have a company that does live events or something like that, in addition to playing, or they teach lessons or something like that. So I think you have to have multiple irons in the fire. The days of, like, making $100,000 a year being a session drummer is out the window. Those days are gone. They're never coming back. So from that perspective, I think the role has changed, where you have to be a lot more entrepreneurial, and you have to be a lot more business savvy. And you also have to understand the landscape of digital media. Like, you can fight it and fight it and fight it and be like, this shit sucks and this is bullshit and this and that. Guess what? It's not going away. So you can either adapt or die. So I know a ton of people who are living in the past, and they're lamenting about the good old days when this happened. And well, guess what? Those days are over, and here's where we are. It's 2019, and you need to start acting like it. So you have to be on social media. I don't care if you hate it or not. You have to be on there, and you have to understand it. You can't just, like, put up your gig dates and think that everyone's going to come. So I think you have to take control of your brand. You have to understand what personal branding is. You have to understand, how you can piece together a career to make it work for you, your goals, your ambitions, whether you want a family, whether you want to buy a house, all those sort of things. Like, that's how I think that the role has changed. But in terms of, like, being a musician, I don't think anything has changed. Like, get in the practice room every day, learn everything there is to know about your instrument, and then forget it all and just play.
I like that answer. What has been your proudest accomplishment so far?
My proudest accomplishment so far would be the record that I put out under my own name. It peaked at number 54 on the jazz charts here in the States. That was a pretty proud moment. And yeah, I mean, like musically, I would say that's one of my proudest moments.
Biggest challenge? Being both a drummer and with the podcast, what two things do you think?
Biggest challenge with being a drummer is for me or just in general?
Let's say for you. Let's just do specifically for you.
I think my biggest challenge as a drummer is honestly probably finding time to still practice and play because I'm running now. I run two businesses, so it's difficult to try to to get into to get into the practice room on a consistent basis.
That totally makes sense. Okay, future plans. What's next for Nick and for the podcast?
I'm take over the world. I don't know. I have a company called Revoice Media. So we are a audio production company and we do live events and things like that. So essentially we're working with musicians, entertainers and athletes and helping them create. We're starting with audio content because my expertise is in podcasting. We're getting into live events and things like that. So I want to continue to build that company. And the second thing is I'd like to parlay that into managing talent. So I want to use the expertise that I have in business, use the expertise that I have in media and branding, and help entertainers, athletes, musicians make good career decisions so that when at the end of their career, sort of when the quote unquote money stops or the light gets turned off, that they've made sound decisions for their career so that they can sort of ride off into the sunset with their family and they've made good business decisions. So that's what I want to do. So I'd like to get into artist management, either on my own as my own management company or work with a team that's managing, artists and entertainers and athletes.
I like that. That sounds very aspirational. But you're an aspirational person, so I'm not surprised to hear that. Last question. This is the last one. Are you ready for it?
I'm ready.
You've probably answered this before, but I still want to know, what is your favorite drum solo in the last 2 decades?
My favorite drum solo in the last 2 decades?
Yep.
Ugh.
Performance that you were just like, oh my God, this is amazing.
You know what? I'll tell you who it is, and people will probably be surprised to hear this. There's a drummer named Nate Smith, and if you go on Instagram, you'll see him. And I saw a video of him play a drum solo in, I think it was like 2008 on YouTube, and was completely blown away. Was like, this dude is my new favorite drummer, and no one knew who he was. I was like, how is this dude not like on the cover of every magazine and the hottest thing since sliced bread? No one knew who he was. Well, all right, maybe I'm exaggerating, but no one was talking about him. But now he's Nate Smith. Like, everyone knows who he is, and well deserved, because he's probably one of my favorite drummers out there. But I'm not a big drum solo guy because I usually don't think that it serves the music that well unless it's a Steve Gadd drum solo. Because, see, if you were going to ask me what my favorite drum solo was, I would say that it's Steve Gadd in 1976 with Stuff, his band Stuff, that he plays this solo that fucking blew my mind, but it wasn't in the last 2 decades. So, so this Nate Smith solo reminded me of a Steve Gadd thing where it just sounded like music to me. I was totally blown away, and it's one of the most musical solos out there. So if anyone wants to hear it, go look up Nate Smith, Chris Potter, The Wheel, and you'll see Nate Smith's drum solo, and it's insane.
So we really got 2 for 1 in that question. We got kind of
that was a very long answer to a very short question.
No, that's great. Thank you so much for being on the podcast today. I really, really appreciate it. Sure. And I really hope we keep in touch and get to talk some more. I'm just going to say goodbye and then, go ahead.
Hold on, quickly. I want to say one thing, if you don't mind.
Yes, give it a plug.
So the people who are listening to this are college students, and when I was in music school, I got a very, very good piece of advice that I would be remiss not to pass it on. You will never, ever, 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 ever have more time to practice than you do now. I'm going to say that again. You will never, ever, 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 ever have more time to practice than you do right now. So take advantage of it, because I promise you in 10 years, you're going to look back and wish that you had. And someone told me that when I was in college, and I didn't believe them. And I was like, I'll always have time to practice. And I was wrong. So do it now. You have the time, and don't regret it in 10 years, because regret is a very, very, very tough thing to swallow.
I could not agree more on all of that. Hear, hear, cheer, cheer.
So I had to pass that on, because it was something that really stuck out to me from college. So
no, I think it's so true. And I also, when I was in college, I'm like, oh, I'm so stressed. It's so stressful. Oh my God, it was so simple compared to what it is outside of it, isn't it?
Yep, 100%.
So true. So just for the uninitiated, one more time, could you just tell them where they can find your podcast?
Sure. They can go to drummersresource.com, or it's everywhere that you listen to podcasts. So it's on iTunes and Stitcher and Spotify, and anywhere that you listen to a podcast, Google Play, all of that kind of stuff. It's all there.
Awesome. Well, thank you so, so, so much.
Of course. Thank you.
Thank you so much again for listening to Inside the Music Industry with me, Dr. Jennifer Otter Bickerdike. If you like what you heard, please make sure to subscribe, share, and comment and like. Have a good one, and we'll see you on the next episode.